We will now reconvene the special budget meeting today, and Ms. Pope is here to walk us through our first draft of the 2025 budget presentation. Ms. Pope, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Graham. Through you to all of council, this is the first draft of the budget presentation. This year, it is a little bit different because our timelines did move up in an anticipation of trying to pass our budget by the end of January of 2025. This report started back in July when management received the first templates to begin filling in. So this document comes to you today with a lot of effort from the management team, staff, and then, of course, the budget committee. We will be going through some key terms and financial concepts. We will touch on some of the impact data that was presented earlier by our representative. But in general discussion for today, I just want to remind you that the 2024 actuals include expenditures up to September 30th. The October expenditures are coming in on November invoices and in processing being paid. So the next draft will have an update. Currently in this draft, because again, we're still using estimates, the 2024 surplus is estimated at about $250,000. That is only an estimate, not an actual. That will be updated. And then based on the draft, because it's a little bit earlier this year as well, we don't have the final municipal roll total for 2025. But based on the estimates that I can see to date, it appears that in the budget, 1% municipal tax rate increase would equal $117,100 in revenue towards our budget. Next slide, please. So as a basic fiscal overview, there's a strong collaboration and stewardship of resources through current and past councils and staff, with an emphasis on expenditure reduction, efficiencies, and sourcing alternative revenues to reduce the impact on taxation. And the vital role of council is to ensure that all the resources are allocated responsibly and in accordance with our community values. As a reminder, we like to put up here the corporate strategic mission. The statement captures the reason that the Township of Cavan-Monaghan exists and guides the actions of the municipality. The Township of Cavan-Monaghan is committed to delivering responsive and cost-effective services that provide for economic, social, and environmental well-being of our ratepayers now and into the future. We have a corporate strategic plan that also guides the budget documents, where Cavan-Monaghan is a strong and sustainable rural community. We celebrate, protect, and promote our unique history and natural heritage, and value the contribution and interests of all ratepayers in building a prosperous future. Some of our budget basics: we have two main components of our budget that's presented each year. There's an operating budget component and a capital budget component. As we develop both the operating and capital components, council has the flexibility for reallocating or reprioritizing funds between programs and services to address emerging issues. And sometimes it's difficult to address all issues or implement all significant changes from year to year. And this is where council's decision-making at the budget process is imperative. A balanced budget. The municipality must maintain a balanced operating budget. The Municipal Act prohibits a municipality from running a deficit on operating expenditures. We can only borrow funds and incur debt for capital and operating in accordance with the annual repayment limit, which is posted each year and as a follow-up in this report. As I mentioned, since July, or actually in June, we had the new budget schedule approved by council. And since there, July moving forward, we've been working diligently through the process, with today being the very first draft. And in January, we will have second draft and hopefully final draft by the end of January. Next slide, please. This is a similar slide. I didn't realize it was going to also be in Sarah's slide, so it must be valuable, but it's just basically an overview to ensure that residents, staff, and council are aware of the different roles and responsibilities. Oftentimes, residents will come into the finance office and think that we are setting our own values on their home, which is not accurate. That's done by MPAC. And it is province-wide. So it's not something that is skewed township to township or municipality. It is a province-wide. And the Government of Ontario establishes the assessment laws and they determine the education rates. We are a collection agency basically for both the county, the upper tier, and the education rates. And the only portion that when we receive and retain is our portion. The municipality basically multiplies the tax rate that's established through the budget by the MPAC current value assessment. And then the property owner would pay taxes based on the services in the community that we're able to deliver on that budget. This is just reiterating that the value of the property is multiplied by the municipal tax rate. We'll just go to the next, there it is. Thank you. And so just in conversation earlier this morning when Sarah was presenting this, there is a lot of concern over the next assessment and what will happen. When we say we're using 2016 values, that was back in the old 4-year phase-in process, took us till 2024 to get there. So basically they established this is what your value is at the beginning of 2016, and we'll allow you 4 years to get there. So we got there by 2020, and then the province froze the assessment. So we haven't had an assessment review since then. In simple terms, if we talk about all properties in our community, if the budget remained exactly the same and all properties in our community doubled in value, the actual tax rate would go to half. That way, when you multiply the CVA value by the tax rate, they would still end up with the same tax bill. So the denominator or the tax roll is the key important piece. That's a piece of legislation that's provided to us. It's frozen in October, provided to us by the second Tuesday in December annually every year. And that's what's used by all municipalities to determine what the tax rate is. I use an estimate in today's report because I don't have the actuals yet, but in the second report, you'll have the final, the actuals. So if there is a province-wide assessment release where we're able to move forward, it will be incorporated into that tax roll. That's the base for which every municipality calculates their taxes. So we'll wait for their decision-making and their communication on that, but I just wanted to clarify that. Upper and lower tier budgets, some municipalities are single tier like the city of Peterborough. We are not. We are part of the Peterborough County. Therefore, there's the upper tier of the Peterborough County and the lower tier, which is the township of Cavan-Monaghan. Next slide, please. So I've spoken about MPAC, the province of Ontario, and the municipality. The next assessment update, they have not released the information. If I can explain the database with MPAC, they're continuing. They haven't stopped working. They're not assessing. As you can tell by Sarah's presentation, they're out there in the community and they're establishing, working with our building departments and sales data to make sure that their database is up to date. That's in the back end. When they turn it on live, then those values will come up to the forefront. Right now, the values in their system that they're showing us and all the municipalities are using is that valuation from 2016. So it's not that they're not working. They're doing that and doing it in the background, but they're not turning it on for all the municipalities to see as of yet. So that's yet to come. So basically what it means for property tax owners is if your CVA value last year was $400,000, then your CVA value for 2025 is $400,000. That piece will remain the same for the 2025 fiscal year. This is just a summary chart that I've shown before for people that weren't around back in 2016 when we had the 4-year phase-in, showing that if a property originally was $162,000 and the value over the 5 years was to grow $66,000, that was added in increments each year to the roll at $16,500 a year. So by the time they reached 2020, they were at their fully phased in value. So this is where we've been frozen since and remain today. For clarification, any new properties in our community, even though you might be purchasing a home for $1 million or $800,000, that is not the value that MPAC is putting on your property as a CVA. They're looking back to what would have been the value of that property back on January 1st, 2016, and that's the value that's assigned to your property for your CVA. The Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund this year We are going to receive $580,400. In the middle of the slide, you can see where I've provided the previous allocations. In general, we've gone up slightly each year. It is based on calculations and growth in the back end, but those OMPF funds are annually applied, through the budget. It's not specific to any department and reduces the ask on the property tax base. Stabilization, taxation, and asset replacement. This is something the municipality moved through way before we even had any idea that the OLG was going to be leaving our community or partially leaving our community. And so back in 2013, there used to be a subsidy basically that the OLG funds would subsidize the difference between the services we were providing and the tax rate that we were charging. So we closed that gap in 2013 for the operating budget. In 2015, we closed the gap for the capital budget. And we continually work towards our asset replacement reserve. And all we're trying to do there is put aside the historical cost of these items. So if something is 100,000 and you have a depreciate or useful life of 10 years, that's 10,000 per year. You want to try to put aside 10,000 a year. So in 10 years, when you have to purchase that item, you have 100,000. Well, that's not going to cover the full cost of the item, of course, but at least it'll cover the majority of it without the inflation added to it. So the point, whenever I bring forward the asset replacement reserve on the reports, that's exactly what I'm doing. Anything that's depreciating, any asset that's depreciating, we're taking a value and saying, let's set that aside. Again, that doesn't cover items that have already previously been fully depreciated because they're not showing there, but it's a great way that we can move forward. And this year, since 2016, since we started this program with an initial transfer, I believe it was $100,000 through council, we're now up to transferring since 2016 and as an average 77% each year. Now, obviously, if you look back through the budgets over the last number of years, we've been much higher than 77%, but we were much lower than 77% back in 2016. So it's mitigating that change. There are different types of reserves. You'll see that on the reserve report. There was a recent reserve report brought on November 4th to council after the auditors had finished the audit for 2023. That is the one that's included in this draft. In second draft, you'll see the 2023 updated with the 2024. Again, it'll still be estimated at that time because we won't have all the bills in. However, we'll be providing you with more updated funds at that time. Keeping reserves for intended purposes. So using a reserve for their intended purpose is a financial best practice. In case of emergency, tax rates and user rates can remain relatively stable. Taxpayers are not burdened by significant increases. Money can be saved for major capital projects that benefit communities as a whole, and municipalities can continue to participate in long-term financial sustainability and better plan and budgets for the future. If reserves are used for unintended purposes, adequate funds may not be available to cover emergencies. Property taxes may need to increase to cover unexpected losses. A lack of funds to maintain a state of good repair of our capital infrastructure may lead to decreased service levels, and there will be a funding gap for projects for which funds were set aside, and projects could be at risk in the event of economic shocks. The annual repayment limit, as I alluded to before, is an annual report that we received from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. The last report we received indicates that we can have an annual repayment limit of approximately $3.3 million. That is reset every year. It's reflective of 25% of our net revenues. And we always stay within that. And anytime there's a report that comes forward to council, we always talk about how much more we're anticipating to use if there's any future debentures. The capital infrastructure projects, we've had 3 major projects that are completing, the fire station being the final one to come on board here, hopefully by the end of the year. This is just an updated slide with the total values to be funded, where they were funding from. The The Cavan Public Works Operations Center was fully completed with the grand opening back in November 2023 and the Millbrook Depot back in October 2022. Next slide, please. This current budget has a 7.97% tax rate. As per the recommendations in the report, staff are not recommending that we go forward with 7.97%, but rather that we bring this forward to council for discussion purposes, for direction as we move forward. Therefore, on this slide, I've provided alternatives 3 to 7%, that if you're trying to get down to a particular percentage, trying to show you how much in the budget would need to be cut in order to achieve that result. As a reminder, for every 1% municipal residential tax rate increase, it does equal an additional $117,100 in revenue. So what does that mean for the taxpayer? So on a $400,000 home, if there was a 1% tax increase, that would equate to $30 for the year. As a reminder, the MPAC property assessments for the 2025 property tax year are not changing, and the remaining frozen at the 2016 fully phased-in values. Tax levy comparison. So in this 2025 draft, there hasn't been a decision made with regards to a tax rate. This is just to provide you with an approximation at this time of what our weighted assessment is. We're looking at approximate growth of about 1.8% in our weighted average of our roll. That is pending. That's second Tuesday in December when we receive the final information from MPAC. And right now we don't know what the tax rate will be until the final presentation. However, if you look since 2021, we've been between 1 and 3.37%. Next slide, please. A couple of factors outside of our control that push some of the dynamics within our budget is the Consumer Price Index that rose 2% in the full 12 months, August to August, on the September release, which is what we use in our budget and as per the personnel policy. CUPE collective agreements did renew back in 2022. Over the 3-year term, there was an overall 5.25% wage increase. Negotiations will be open again in 2025, and so we have a placeholder at this time. And the Construction Price Index was not known at the time of this report. However, the Q2 indicated a 4.8% increase. It appears that Q3 to Q3 is going to be a little bit less. That's what drives the changes to our development charges. So that's not known at this time, but that's just a placeholder so you can understand where we're moving towards. And the annual user fees and charges bylaw will be brought forward in December to council. And this is to ensure that municipal revenues for services reduce the impact of the cost of these services on the municipal property tax rate. These revenue projections or changes will be applied in the next budget report. Municipal tax rates. So if you look at the very center grade in area, you can see that it says 2025 estimated MPAC roll total. This is where we're estimating our valuations. Again, this comes from MPAC, but this is what drives that denominator that I'm speaking of when you take the total budget. In this particular budget, we need approximately $12.6 million through the municipal tax base, which is divided by the MPAC roll total, which brings us to that 7.97% that's in this budget today if it were left alone. Next page is the budget summary. This is summarizing the operating, the capital, reserves, grants, user fees, and then the net result, which is that total middle column. What do we need through the tax base? And again, down under revenues, where it says 7.97 residential tax rate increase, you'll see that $12.6 million figure again. And that's the amount that we're utilizing to determine what the tax base will be, tax rate will be. Next slide, please. So we have some adjustments that have been applied across all the departments. So rather than repeat them over and over again, I'm just going to speak to some of them. Previously, in budgets historically, we've had staff wages split amongst different departments. We have found that that is a cumbersome process and doesn't give added true value because where they're working and putting on their timesheet is the added true value to know where time is being spent. So this year in this budget, we've realigned the budget to place someone 100% in their primary department. I'll give you an example. For myself as finance, there's also IT. So there was a component that used to go under IT of my salary and then a component under finance. And so now I'm no longer split between those two. I'm 100% under finance department. So that's just to clarify there. There's no increase to do that. Basically, we're just reallocating across the departments, putting everybody 100% in their primary department. Updated source deduction and benefit rates that we've received to date are all included in this draft. We've used the 2% CPI for the grid indexing. We've used 2% increase to hydro, gas, fuel, and telecommunications services as a placeholder. We do look closer to those line items as we move towards the end of the year, because if there's any potential where the expenses were overestimated last year, we will definitely reduce them so that we're not overestimating in the 2025 budget. So that's something that's always flexing each time you see a new revision. And then any internal allocation expense lines across departments, that doesn't increase overall, but we're just making sure that if there's one department paying for something than another, we want to make sure that they're appropriately allocated. A good example of that would be the building department for some of their IT services, because they are part of the county of Peterborough with us under the managed services contract. And because the building department is funded through the permits and not the municipal tax rate, we need to make sure that there's an allocation there. The building department's paying for some of their own IT. And so we do those internal allocation lines to make sure they're paying for their fair share as well. This is an overview chart looking at the 2024-2025 budget. As a reminder, the Consumer Price Index rose 2%. So if you look at the total department and other services levy at 2.7%, if you take away CPI, our operating budget is up by 0.7 of 1%. It's not a full percent. So just to give you an indication of the changes in our departments. So 2.8% between our departments. When you add in council, library, boards and authorities, and our police contract, you get to 2.7%. Next slide. Overall, the environmental tax rate actually has decreased this year. Most of that is in regards to the additional revenue that we're receiving through the disposal with the Circular Materials Ontario revenues that are coming in. And that's in more detail within the operating budget. And the water and wastewater budget continues to use the rate study, which is a 5-year study, and that will be done next year. So there'll be new revisions. We always take a look in the same way with development charges. When we come back to the water wastewater user fees, we're looking at what happened over the last 5 years versus the projections, what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, and then smoothing out any rate increases over that period of time to set in the new 5-year user fees and charges. Next slide, please. Capital budget overview. This is segregated by department with different categories. As you know, sometimes wishes versus need. We've tried to bring this down to a very slim wishes and closer to need before council. But of course, it's at the discretion of council as to which projects move forward in the budget. Overall, if we look at the entire capital budget, which is more detailed later, but we're looking at net capital expenditures of approximately $4.4 million. And if you look at the funding sources in that component, $2.9 million is towards the asset replacement reserve and $1.4 million through the municipal tax levy. Next slide, please. We'll go through these in more detail as we stop to talk with each department about capital items. But in your package, there's the capital requests itemizing each department the type of request. Just to go through the format of this once again, because I know you see it once a year when we're bringing it forward at the budget, but the requested budget purchase, or the first column, is the total cost that we're expecting. Then we look for any other funds that are available, whether it's grants, specific reserves, if we had any leftover funds last year into this year for any of the rollovers. If there's any money that's been set aside in that asset replacement reserve, we pull that down as well. And then we look at an adjusted total. So on the right-hand side there, the adjusted total, that's the amount that's included in the municipal tax rate, because we don't need to go to the taxpayer for the funds that we already have. So when you're looking at reductions, you need to look at the adjusted total, because that's what affects the tax rate. So that's the next couple of pages there for each of the departments. We'll go through more detail later. Grant applications that have been rolled over. So we have two primary large grant applications through the ICIP program. So if you recall, with regards to the Parks and Facilities report, that in 2023, staff were directed to commence planning for the creation of a community park. Thereafter, a scope change request was submitted to the Ministry of Infrastructure. The results are unknown at the time of this report, but they are ongoing, and we will await the decision-making for that. We do know that all projects under the ICIP program are required to be completed by 2026. The other one is the rehabilitation of the historically designated Old Millbrook School. We've been raising the funds over the last 4 municipal budgets in both of these projects. And again, the project completion for that project will also be 2026. Next slide, please. We have partnered with Grant Match, a company that provides services to municipalities to help with the application process. A lot of these applications will come in not only last minute, but they are becoming much more detailed. Much more time is required. And so Grant Match has been excellent in working with us on these different programs. So this is just to keep council abreast of the current grants that are in the queue that we've applied for. We do not have funding knowledge of any of these, but these are just in the hopper at this time. And we continue to work towards reducing any impact on our taxpayers wherever possible through achieving grants. Next slide. Water wastewater is standalone, funded through the user fees and charges, which is set by the 5-year bylaw. All of the funds at the end of the year for water wastewater, if unspent, go right back into the reserve, and then again pulled out in the following year budget. Those who are on the water wastewater system pay for the wastewater system. Those who are not on the water wastewater system are not paying for the water wastewater system. Water wastewater bills are a completely separate billing system that goes out 6 times a year. Every 2 months, a bill is sent in the mail to those recipients. It is not on the property tax bill. Property tax bill is completely separate. So the recommendations of this report, that council receives the first draft for discussion and education purposes, and that council provides direction on the projects to be removed, added, or changed from future budget discussions, and selects a municipal tax rate required to fund the operating and the capital budgets. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. Very well laid out. Obviously, so just one point of clarity, that I don't believe, and I could stand to be corrected as always, that the totality of some of the committee requests this morning that we heard, and I think there's obviously a few one we'd have heard, aren't reflected in the 7.97% that we're currently so presented. So just so council's aware, not everything that was submitted by or discussed by the committees and presented today was presented fiscally beforehand. So Kimberly has still got to add that in. So that will be in there for the second draft, unless certain decisions with regards to those programs and requests are made today for the purpose of our discussion. So anyways, questions, members of council? Councilor Perry? Nope. No good right now. Okay, well, we do have the unique and unfortunate circumstance that we are short a couple of members of council today. So there was a discussion briefly that we're not going to make a lot of tumultuous changes or suggestions at this point because it's not fair for the 40% of our council that's not in attendance today. That being said, I'm sure there's going to be a few questions that I have written down, so we'll go through those. Kimberly, with regards to some of the discussion earlier, I'm just going to flip to my capital budget. So just give me a second here when I go through. Yeah, do you want to go to the capital in there? That would probably be helpful. So just one point of clarity as well, Ms. Holt. So with regards, so just so I'm ensuring that we're reading this correct, the asset management reserve, if at 100% funding is 2.9 million, and the below number, the 2024 request adjusted, that is the amount that we put towards the asset replacement reserve last year at the budget, correct? So right now, if we were to fund it at 100%, and we always try to pursue 100%, usually we're in the 90s or the high 80s. But right now at 100%, that's 2.952 million going towards the asset replacement at 100%.
Yes, that is correct. We always bring forward in the first draft so the council is aware of what that 100% is and then to await your decision making.
And by my math, that's roughly a 370,000 increase dollar for dollar year over year. Okay, very good. With regards to the official plan, this might be for Ms. Hurley or a combination of Ms. Hurley and Ms. Pope. The official, obviously I believe, and this is kind of why I'm asking, I haven't heard any updates about any feedback that the county may have received about their OP. I've heard rumors about that. Ms. Ellis, you might have any insights, but I know that we are being held up, well, initially by the province missing the deadline for the legislation that was supposed to be released a year earlier than it was. And now we've also subsequently heard back that the county OP wasn't initially going to be accepted or adjusted by the province to meet the new PPS standards. Is there any update as to when we might hear or the county is expecting to hear about that? Because obviously we can't move forward. And I'm just wondering, okay, we have 126K in the reserve. And I think if I'm not mistaken, that usually the total project costs about 200K. So we're making good progress, but I'm just curious. We have a 50,000 identified in the line in the planning building department right now. I just didn't know if there's an update, if we are optimistic that that work might start this year. I guess it's predicated, but so twofold. One, is there any update? And three, is there a part of that process that we are realistically going to start this year in the absence of an approved county OP, or does it fully nothing can be started until that county OP is finalized? So maybe between the CAO and Karen, they can provide some insight.
To you, Mayor Graham, members of council. There is a county TAC meeting scheduled for December 2nd. So at that time, we will receive an update from county planning staff about the results of their meeting with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So before you finalize the budget, we will, I think, excuse me, have a game plan about what the timing might be. When the budget was created, I was quite optimistic that we would be moving forward in 2025. Every day I'm not really sure where we're going, but I think we would like to start in 2025 if at all possible, because our document does need to be updated to reflect the standards that we live in today and the changes, particularly with regard to additional residential units and some of those other key policy directions that we need Kevin Monaghan to establish where we want to go. So, but after December 2nd, I can give you an update.
Ms. Hurley, any comments about that? No? Okay, thank you for that, Ms. Ellis. So we're still waiting as per usual, but we'll see what happens next. Nope, still no other questions. I'll keep going. Okay, perfect. All right, on to the next one. And this is maybe for the CAO as well, between various, it's across multiple departments, but I'm going to default to the CAO because she's the boss. I have a concern. One of the concerns I had, and I didn't want to get into it with the Mr. Hack committee, is, we initially, I think it was the previous council, if I'm not mistaken, approved this funding for this mural, right? And that mural project was one thing, and it's been rolled over and rolled over and rolled over. And I kind of have an issue with approving capital budgets for specific projects, and then they have that approval for that project, and it's now becomes something completely different. So I guess it's somewhat accountable, but it's not a good precedent. I feel like we should be allowing multiple years of rollovers and a full kind of what I would say transformation of what that project was originally to what it's being proposed as now. Is there any suggestions as to how we can maybe address that nuance from occurring? Because it kind of undermines the point. Like, we're supposed to be improving these capital projects for identified projects to be done this year. And this one, I think, is 5 to 6 years old, if I'm, and I could be wrong on that timeline, but it's multiple years and it's no longer a mural. And yet, you know, we're referring to it as Station Park sign, which I think is indicative of how much it's no longer a mural. So I want to figure out if there's a way or a suggestion from staff that we can, you know, not prevent that sort of, you know, lingering and transformative issue to moving forward, because those monies aren't going towards a mural. Any suggestions open?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Council. I think it has changed. Obviously, there was a report to council. I'm not exactly sure what date. It did change from the original intent to now a signage plan for Station Trail. But I think in all fairness to our presenters, even today, they stated it sort of morphed into something completely different now. So I still go back to allow staff to go back and have a conversation with this group about this, and we'll come back at our second meeting. And potentially maybe, you know, I would probably remove the mural kind of discussion, and we'll sort of figure out what this program is going to look like. But to answer your other question, which is a two-part question with regards to how do we not make this happen again? I can't really answer that because it did go to council. There was a report, it did change, and council directed it, you know, supported the change from a mural to a sign. So that's sort of where we're at today. I think what I'm hearing from you in the future is when a capital project completely changes into new capital projects, we should identify that, we should explain it, and we should clearly seek council's support or direction on that in the future if the change is so drastic as what the original intent was. So I take that. Thank you. I hear that. And we will consider that moving forward.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it might be something we need to refine in our terms of reference for the committees, like if there's this nuance that I know it's come before council, but I think it, even since it's came before council last time, it's changed yet again, in my opinion, because it went from a mural was a painted, you know, image, and then it wasn't going to be painted. It was going to, so that's what changed from mural to sign. But now it's something again different based on the rendering that we saw. But anyways, the staff can take that back. Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, I don't know if it's really relevant or how it works, but now that we own that property next to the painted mural, does that not change some of the dynamics of whether we need that mural tile replaced?
Well, there's been an abandonment of the mural project altogether, right? So if it's under the jurisdiction of the committee to come back and say, hey, actually, we want to go back and do the mural. So I think there was a number of, I think part of the catalyst, if I remember correctly, and again, multiple years and multiple budgets ago, that there was actually concerns about the feasibility of improving the mural because of the deterioration of some of the brickwork, et cetera. And the fact that it would not have much permanence, like it would be something that would continually need to be reinvested to be improved unless there was some encasing over top of it that was installed. But there was concern about the feasibility of that because of the age and stage of the brick. And obviously that structure is owned by not the municipality. So that's the historical lens I can provide on that, but it's definitely something that the Mr. Hack committee can discuss. But I think it was more the physical and litigious components of the project that was why they shifted gears with regards to the recognition. Other questions? Nope, I'll keep going. So one of the requests that a question and then something for council to consider, and I don't think it's earth shattering, so I'm not trying to break the integrity of the discussion about not changing too much. In the Parks and Facilities budget, there's a transfer to Parkland Reserve. So one question I had is, I support that, and I'd actually like council to consider an amendment. What I'd like to establish moving forward, if council agrees, is a consideration for a 1% tax levy dedicated allocation to Parkland Reserve. We even with the recent open house, there's a commitment and a recognition that there's a lot of amenities that the township is lacking, or the amenities that we have are dated and in various states of decay. That was highlighted throughout multiple presentations over the various years and councils before us. So what is very clear is that, especially with the changing development charge legislation, there's less and less other alternative streams to sort of repopulate the Parkland Reserve. So one of the things I'd like to propose is adjusting this 100,000 to be equivalent to 1% of the tax levy. So that's a $17,100 increase at this time. But I'd like to have that be something council consider on budgets moving forward, because we have to start saving for some of these costs. And starting now, we'll start to help repopulate that reserve when we consider these incremental investments over time. And while we're still utilizing the OLG funds to pay off the first phase of the CMCC until that's finalized, that was, I think historically, it's fair to say, the revenue that went to sort of replenish that Parkland Reserve, but that is no longer available until we get these other components paid off that council has decided to direct those funds toward. So I think it's important, this isn't the total amount of that revenue, but I think it's important that confronting the amount of investment and cost of investment in Parkland that we're talking about, even, we even had to amortize the splash pad over multiple years to accumulate enough revenues, right? And so this was sort of taking a placeholder, sort of work towards repopulating that reserve over time, so that we're able to make some of these investments that are planned for in the next few years. So that was something I'd like council to consider. Obviously, that whatever I'm using the levy 1% value because it changes year over year and most often years increases, but it's also something that I think residents can see clearly that this is an investment in this. And there's a few other things that I'll get to later that I think can also be redirected towards this. But so maybe I think we should do a motion maybe now. So if council is supportive, anyone wants to second the motion to increase this to be equivalent to the 1%, and that stays as a budget line year over year. So the question before I make that motion is, just for clarity, because we've identified it as a transfer to reserve, but then when I flip over to the reserve document, which reserve is Kimberly, I guess, which reserve is that 100,000 lined up to go into, just from a number standpoint, just so we can all follow along? Because we have obviously there's the Parkland in lieu of, which we know is a specific source of revenue, but and then we have a Parkland Reserve Fund with the city of Peterborough after it. And I'm like, well, I don't think that's it either. So I was just curious, we have a Parks and Facilities Equipment, but I don't know if that's it either. So Ms. Hurley, or maybe between the two of you could provide some clarity.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to council and over to Ms. Pope. I believe we were going to we have a Parkland Reserve Fund. We were to remove the language that says City of Peterborough, because that hasn't taken place for many, many years. So it is a general, correct me if I'm wrong, but Ms. Pope and I did talk about removing that potential language there. So then you would have your Parkland Reserve will just continue.
What the CAO is saying is it's exactly right. The only difference that you're going to see then when we move forward, because the previous Parkland Reserve Fund, the one where it says City of Peterborough, it used to be under committed. It was required because it was given to us. It'll change. And so I'll move that one down to designated reserves, which is what council has set forth. The name change will change, and it will add these new funds at the 117,100 pending the decision of council today.
And will it, just for the sake of following, will it retain that same number, like the 1943?
I just need to double check. I believe so, because that's just the extension on the tail end. It will move departments internally within our GL chart of accounts, but I believe the end portion will probably stay the same.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. So twice, the two changes. Committed to designate. City. Nope. It may change numbers, but I won't hold you to that yet, but that's where you'll see it. Councilor Burns, sorry.
Through the chair, question. I'm not quite clear on what you're asking. So this 1%, is that going to be something that's going to be entrenched every budget moving forward? Or where are you going with this idea of upping the contributions to the Parks and Rec?
So there aren't any budgeted allocations to Parks and Rec reserves. So there's no monies being saved or set aside towards a lot of the conversations that we're having about all of the amenities upgrades, expansions, et cetera. So my suggestion is that we start allocating 1% of the tax levy increase towards exclusively towards park fixtures and or whatever amenities councils decide in the future to purchase for parks throughout the township. So because of the absence of that OLG funding, and that will be continued for at least 2 more years, I'm not saying we need to commit to it year over year, but I just would like to establish a 1% in this budget, and then council can consider if they want to adopt that moving forward. We've only got a couple more budgets for this term of council, and obviously there won't be any, it's not binding to the future council and anyone at any time, but the motion can undo it. I just think it makes some sense and it's some clarity that we're raising up 1% of the tax levy increase is explicitly going to future investments in Parks and Rec. So I'll couch that motion for a second because I got a couple other questions that relate to this conversation in regards to reserves. Is that okay? Sorry, do you follow up? Sorry, I just want to make sure I answered your question.
Through the chair, yes, I got that part. Now, that being said, if we move forward with this increase in the parks, that's going to increase the tax levy slightly.
Yeah, so right now, based on this budget, it would increase the levy by 17,100, which is approximately just over 0.1%. Right, okay. Anyways, in regards to that, there's also a few reserves that I think aren't really serving or aren't intending to serve a future purpose that are kind of just been placeholders from historical, I don't know, evolutions in municipal finance. So first one being the municipal council grant reserve. I haven't noticed any utilization of that reserve in some time. So one motion that I'd like council to consider is we're not in the business of offering isolated grants. So that 57,000 could be redirected to the Parkland Reserve. There's no monies coming out of it. It's just a placeholder for something that doesn't occur anymore. We already, through, as you've seen through some of the committees, we do some of the work that might have been grant otherwise funded in the past, but it's just kind of one of those things that it used to be how things were done and there's been an evolution, but there's still monies left in it. And I think it would be better served to reallocate that monies towards a Parkland Reserve because that's where I think makes the most sense for, and there's the most upcoming investments in that regard. So, and it's money that's already been levied. So that's the sort of the catalyst. Does anyone have any issues with that reserve? Any concerns about the municipal grant reserve? Okay, so I'll come back with a motion and we might do a couple of these things at the end. So I'm just going to make note. The other reserve, I believe, and maybe I'm wrong because I don't know if Kimberly and I talked about this one before, is the MMAH service delivery grant. Can you maybe speak to that grant and just tell me, this highlight from my standpoint? And I know this is 2023, so I also should caveat, this isn't last year's, this is the year before. And that will be audited, that will be updated. Will it be updated for the second draft or the third draft? Anyways, there's two questions.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to all of council. So the 2023 audited reserves is always, or the previous year's audited reserves is always brought forward at first draft. Second draft, we bring forward where we think we're going to get to at the end of 2024 because we're not there yet. And then by the time we hit final, we're estimating based on the decisions of council where we think we'll get to for the end of 2025. That answers that piece. As far as the MMAH service delivery grant, that was back in 2019 when we did, there are a number of reports. I can go back and pull them, but basically it included some of the IT infrastructure, external consultants. We purchased the new financial software. We did a lot of migrations. Those funds are being used. As you know, we're almost at the tail end of the Diamond implementation with Virtual City Hall coming. So as of the end of 2023, that was a balance that was remaining to finalize and finish all the different parts of that program, but there won't be any funds, or if there are, it'll be very minimal at the end of 2024. So that there's not a significant amount. You could offer to, if there are any dollars left there at the end of 2024, to transfer those over, but I don't think that there will be a significant amount there at the end.
So you kind of answered my next question, but just to clarify. So there aren't constraints on the potential reallocation of any remaining funds from that, so that you're aware of. Okay, so that obviously we can do due diligence in that for second phase as well. So okay, so if what we could do is then add an additional, if there are any remaining funds from the finalization of the project in that reserve, that they also be redirected to the Parkland Reserve. So I'm just going through these reserves trying to say, like, this isn't happening. It doesn't serve a purpose. Let's put it in the Parkland Reserve because we know there's expenses coming up. Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Pope, given the comment with regards to the MMAH one, would it make, because that was originally for website and everything, was it not? Sorry.
Sure, it was all to do with any type of an IT improvement. So we brought forward, there's a couple of different reports, but the different aspects. One piece was that website, one piece was the financial software, one piece was the consultant. There are different components, so yes.
Follow up?
Yes, sir. Would it make sense, or is there an option? Because originally for website and IT, there is a capital ask regarding the website, GovStack. If there is funds in there, would that also be an option? Because I'm talking about website design or website or IT issues. There is funds here or an ask under the capital. So if there money's left over, could we utilize some of that under there?
I believe that would be an excellent allocation of those funds, provided there anything left over.
So just so council's following along, so what you're referring to is the 21,586 capital investment in the levy, the hardware replacement program and upgrades, is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. It's under planning and building and economic development. I'm sorry. Yes, that's okay. It says it's for the website GovStack migration for our website, and therefore that's the reason why I was suggesting that maybe if there are funds, that would be an appropriate place to consider.
Okay, well, we don't have to it doesn't sound like there's a lot of optimism that there's going to be a significant amount, so maybe we can just defer any consideration about that reserve until a later budget meeting, because we'll see an update from there. Okay, those are, I think, the main reserve questions that I had. So then I guess if council's agreeable, we could make two separate motions at this point. One being a motion that the capital line for the Parkland Reserve be increased from 100,000 to 117,100, or the future amount equivalent to 1% of the tax levy increase. Is that okay language wise for you, Ms. Pope? I tried to give the caveat because I don't want it to come back at 117.1 if it's going to evolve to something else.
If you just reference 1%, I'll have the final roll total for the next report, and I'll put in exactly what that value is. It could be the same, but if it changes, that gives me flexibility.
Okay, any discussion about that motion, Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, on that point, I guess, when will somebody like me see the feedback from both the Monopoly night and then the presentation just made a couple nights ago to see what the actual feel is for the crowd? Like, you have a little more privy to what's gone on than I will, but I look at this from a situation of, is it for the greater good of the entire township? It's kind of trying to figure out where things are at.
So we just had the open session last night, so it would be 2025 at some point when they come back to council and a report on the meeting. So Ms. Hurley, do you want to provide some more clarity on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to Councilor Byrne. So the corporate strategic plan is intended to come back before council in January with a draft for you to review. With regards to, that's the corporate strategic plan. Then there are two other projects. There's one for the remaining lands of the CMCC, and then there's the downtown park. Those conceptual designs right now will either be presented on, depending upon getting all the feedback, getting the comments, because we're just in the process of receiving that. No one's been privy to any information prior to what everyone's seen publicly. It's being carried out through our consultant. At this time, I cannot confirm if they were going to be here on December 16th or they too would be presenting in January.
Yep. And again, this is just a transfer to reserve. There's no spending of the money next year. There's no capital expenditures from Parkland about buying anything. So there's no commitments, there's no ask at this point for any investment in any of the parkland. It's simply trying to populate or repopulate a reserve to have monies to do so when we get all of that future data, and council will make the decisions about what those investments are. Councilor Byrne, follow up?
Through the chair, yes. So I just, because of your comment you made that there was a lot of feedback that was like we have a lack of or diminished parks and recreation stuff. So I just wonder what kind of feedback we're talking about. That's all.
Sure, that was feedback in phase 1 of the Parks and Rec strategic plan update. That was the comprehensive summary of, it talked about all these different amenities. I think it ranked them as well, whether it's basketball court, every little amenity. It was done in a part of the survey and research and stuff and feedback that was received. So there's obviously more work to do when we decide about the 2 parks that we haven't even got the feedback on from, what was it, last night? No, it was 2 nights ago. I can't keep track of this week. Sorry about that. Anyway, so yeah, so we haven't got any feedback on any of those amenities, and there's no plans to purchase any parkland other than what's in the capital budget now, which is minimal. So yeah, so like I said, it's really just starting to put some monies away for all of the various things that we're going to eventually have to decide on, various components, and it's going to take decades to build out and afford some of the things that have even been discussed. So from my opinion, we got to start amortizing some of those costs now if we want to build anything in the next 2 years. 100,000, as we knew, the splash pad, I think, ended up being something in the realm of close to 300 for one amenity. So right now we have a budget of 40,000 and change, and no inflection of, or no injection of revenue beyond the parkland in lieu of reserve, which is separate from the DC standpoint, which has constraints on how it can be spent. You can't replace things with DC revenue. You can only buy new things. So replacement would have to, any replacement of existing infrastructure would have to be paid for from a separate reserve, not DC parkland cash in lieu of. So we only have 40,000 right now to go for it. If we move to 57, obviously that helps a little bit. And from the municipal council grant reserve. And then I just think it's important that we start repopulating this, because we're not going to have the OLG revenues for another few years at least to do that for us. So we're going to have to do it ourselves. So that's kind of the catalyst for that. Did that answer the question, Councilor Brent? Yeah. Okay. So then, if I believe right now, so we can do it as 2 separate motions, or we can do it as 1 motion. Let's do it as 2 separate, just for clarity. So that staff be directed to come back or to adjust the $100,000 transfer to reserve or parkland reserve to be equivalent to 1% of the tax levy rate. So that's the motion. I'll move it. Seconder, Councilor Natchop, all in favor? That is approved. Okay, and then the municipal council grant reserve. Any questions about transferring those monies to the parkland reserve? Any questions, any concern? Nope. Okay, so that motion's pretty self-evident. So the municipal council grant reserve funds in the total of 57, that I'm assuming there's no ongoing contributions to that, right? So that's okay. You just shake, that's fine. So that the total value of the municipal council grant reserve of $57,050 be transferred to the parkland reserve fund in the second draft of the budget report. Mover, seconder, Councilor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. All right. Well, we've got a couple of adjustments accomplished. Thanks for that, Council. I appreciate it. Any other questions? No? Okay. Ms. Hurley?
I'm sorry, through you, Mr. Chairman, to council. So I just want to make it clear, there are no other additional comments or questions with regards to the capital budget. Okay, thank you.
I didn't say I was finished. I was just getting a couple motions out of the way here. I don't want to make 3. Oh yes, I do have a question, and I believe Mr. Hancock's here and Drew. Wow. I asked Drew this question before, but now that we have the man himself in our presence, I thought I'd ask the chief, no disrespect intended, Drew. The road milling program. Is the milling itself eligible for either OCIF or CCBF funding? I didn't know because of the nuances with those various amounts of funding, but I think Drew had a strong comfort that it might be eligible in the future, but I didn't know if you had a similar opinion.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, both Drew and I looked at it, and it can be considered as part of that program.
And on that same subject, where do we, is this multiple projects or like it's not a 50,000 isn't an extravagant amount? Is it one specific area where the milling will be occurring?
It's actually various locations just in preparation for the surface treatment.
So we believe it is eligible for either OCIF or CCBF funding? Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Hancock, while you are here in our presence again, the roadside mower, can you talk to council a little bit about the transfer to reserve for that item? I think it's been unsuccessful in previous iterations of budgets, if I'm not mistaken, but I just wanted to sort of have a refresher as to what that equipment does.
Through Mr. Mayor to council, the roadside mower that we were looking at, the type manufacturer is a Mantis machine. It is actually several townships, I guess, in our area, OSM being one of them, has one. They purchased one. Right now, we do our roadside with a rental tractor and a side cutting mower. I think we found that it suffices, but it's not as good as having something that provides a much better, cleaner roadside. So this machine, we've actually, Drew just sent me a text earlier saying that they have a machine at Lindsay as a machine if someone wants to have a look at. So the Mantis machine is available. OSM have offered to actually have a look at theirs in operation. It does much more than just grass cutting, though. It's actually set up. It has an arm on it. It does roadside brushing, a lot of the things that are causing us problems on our roadside. The machine is, it's a large purchase price, but it is versatility and it does reduce our contracted services. So we have in this budget, there's 100,000 set aside as a reserve. The intent was to build it up over a number of years and purchase the machine once we had the funds set aside.
And what is the expected total cost estimate of that machine while we're here?
We have the present number on the machine that we were looking at. It's a $400,000 purchase.
So the expectation would be, so if it's going to be roughly 400,000, we're only putting away 25% of the cost of it. Okay, fair enough. Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair to Mr. Hancock, you mentioned it's in Lindsay. If a person wanted to look at that machine that we're discussing right now, would that be at one of the farm dealerships or at the Lindsay Works Yard?
Yeah, it's one of the farm tractor dealerships there. We can get you the.
Any other questions? Okay. That was the most of my questions for the first round, but obviously, moving the budget up. The unfortunate reality is this current budget is well, it doesn't reflect all of the committee asked, but it also is based a lot more on estimates and guesstimates. So we'll have to wait till the second draft to see more of the true up of the actuals, et cetera. And we'll be looking forward for those decisions, and hopefully the other 40% of our council will be in attendance for that night as well. So with that said, we do need to come forward with a motion if there's no more questions that council receive the first draft budget discussion and presentation, and that direct staff to come back with revised budgets for the second draft in January meeting. Is that sufficient to that meet on? I think that covers all our requirements, right? Yep. Okay. Moved by Councillor Natchoff, seconded by Councillor Byrne. All in favor? That is approved. All right, there's the confirming bylaw is that bylaw number 2024-62 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the special council meeting held on November 21st, 2024, be read a first, second, and third time past this 4th day of November, signed by the mayor and the clerk and the corporate seal attached thereto, moved by Councillor Natchoff and Councillor Byrne. All in favor? That is approved. Lastly, motion to adjourn the special council meeting. Councillor Natchoff and Councillor Byrne. All in favor? That is approved. For all those watching online, we want to make a note that the next second draft budget meeting is Thursday, January 9th. There are 2 special budget meetings that day. Council will be meeting to discuss the adjustments in the second draft of the budget in the afternoon, starting at 1 p.m. And then we'll have the evening public meeting where members of the public can come and discuss the amended budget at 5 p.m. also in the council chambers. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll look forward to further discussions down the road. Thank you.